only 8 states were able to offer that full suite of key services. Meaning 39 states were able to offer at least one of the 4, 21 states were able to offer 3 of 4 services within these buckets. But we had identified these 4 core components, and only 8 states were able to provide that. We also saw that in terms of how systems were selecting what services to provide, the primary driver of selection was staff availability. This was for a variety of reasons, but what it meant was that things such as labor market trends, outcome data, what was working wasn't driving the decision-making of CTE services. It was what staff might be trained to have, what that one partnership that they might have would be able to provide. And that was really what was driving the decision-making in terms of what was being provided, and not ensuring that the services provided were leading to employment or outcomes. The second sort of key finding that we had identified, and I recognize I'm moving through these pretty quickly, so I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end of this, was that most state juvenile correctional agencies lack the partnerships necessary to help incarcerated youth overcome barriers to obtaining viable employment. One of the things that we were really cognizant of is that juvenile justice systems were not focused on or equipped to really be the leaders in CTE or workforce development services. It hadn't been a focus of most systems in the past. It wasn't something that staff had been trained on. It wasn't something that resources had been devoted to. And so we wanted to see, to the extent that systems were able to partner with key partners in workforce and education fields in order to provide the services. And what we found was that there was a lack of formal partnerships. So once again, while maybe one jurisdiction had a really strong partnership here, one facility had a really good partnership, on the state level, there wasn't those formal partnerships between key entities. And it was really more true on the workforce development side than it was on the education. So while 39 states had some level of partnership with their community colleges, only 25 states were able to form partnerships with technical or trade schools. Only 17 states were connecting with their local WIOA boards. Only 5 states with their chambers of commerce. And this gets back to the first issue we had seen about the selecting of services and the lack of those conversations, being able to guide what sort of services are being delivered, how they might connect to what's available in the community, and how those things could be pieced together. And the lack of partnerships really makes that a difficult concept. But what it also had, and this is just another slide running through, and similar to the first, what we wanted to see was a full range of services. So services available to youth regardless of the track they wanted to go on, whether that was to employment or to higher education. And what we found was that few states were able to have a range of partnerships to provide those services. So only 20 states had formal partnerships with community colleges, community-based organizations, and employers. And so what that means is if you were in a state, one of the 39 states that had a partnership with community colleges, but we're in one of the 9 states that didn't have a community college and a community-based organization partnership, if you were looking to move into employment upon release as opposed to into higher education, in those 9 states, you weren't having those partnerships and that warm handoff and that reentry case planning happening in an effective way across the state. But where it also impacted, and I think it's important for the conversation today, was in the ability for juvenile justice systems to utilize all available resources to provide services to this population. So as you can see, according to this finding, our survey, only 26 states were utilizing Perkins funds to support CTE or workforce development services for this population, and only 11 states were utilizing WIOA funds. And under both Perkins and WIOA, this is part of an opportunity youth population. It is part of an identified population that funds can be utilized for. I believe in Perkins 5, it's up to 2%. But because of the lack of partnerships, because juvenile justice systems weren't at the table, they weren't part of the Perkins planning process. They weren't part of workforce boards and utilizing WIOA services. They weren't working with state locals and chambers of commerce. And they weren't able to advocate for these resources being utilized for this population and to provide these services. And as a result, they weren't, despite being technically available, were not being utilized in order to fund services in the majority of states. The third finding that we looked at was around data, and what we found was that most states did not track key employment outcomes for incarcerated youth, either while they were in facilities or upon release. And this is important because we see in our technical assistance across the country that generally when things aren't reported on and they're not and data is not part of decision making, it tends to lag behind. So going back to the first point about how services were identified, in an ideal world would have loved to see many states using labor market trends and employment outcomes being what was driving that service delivery. But what we found was that states couldn't answer those questions. They couldn't say what was happening, how the services were performing. So even for youth within facilities, only 37 states collected data on industry-recognized credentials or certificate earned. Only 17 states collected any data on post-secondary degrees or diplomas or earned. And only 8 states collected data on all 3 of the outcomes identified in this slide. And why that matters is because of reentry and case planning. So if states aren't regularly looking at what is happening within facilities and how that work is being done is moving, then that information isn't being included into reentry case plans consistently. It's not guiding decision-making about, warm handoffs and what services the youth should be engaging in upon release to the community. And it really puts a lot of the onus on the youth or young adult themselves to push for these things because they know that they were taking this process, not because it was being looked at a systematic level. We also recognize that tracking data within community and upon release around workforce development and CTE is extremely difficult. However, even looking at that was still relatively disappointing that only 20 states were able to say whether students had enrolled in post-secondary education upon release. Only 17 could say whether youth had obtained employment. Only 14 could say whether they maintained employment for a period of either 3 or 6 months. And once again, this gets back to it's extremely difficult to know how services are performing if you can't say whether they're resulting in the positive outcomes that you're looking to seek. We recognize once again this is extremely difficult, and it's another key example of why partnerships are critical because the education partners or the workforce development partners, this may be data that they have and that they can share and provide to juvenile justice systems to help inform them. As an example of best practice, we actually see that in Florida where a workforce partnership, an employer partnership exists to help guide the decision making about what is happening and what services are being selected. But without this data, it's extremely difficult to do that effectively and to ensure that the services that are provided are meeting the needs of the youth in custody. In the brief, we had identified a number of best practices that we had seen either at the local level or from working with stakeholders and key experts. I don't want to just read these slides. I believe they will be made available to you all, as well as you can see them in the report. But just some key really things that we identified that we think could improve CTE and workforce development services was to designate staff to oversee this. So as I mentioned at the beginning, juvenile justice systems had not consistently looked at this as an issue. It's something that resources have been put towards. And as a result, there was generally no staff who was responsible for this. There was no one making sure that the partnerships existed. There was no one who was responsible for attending LEOA meetings or being part of the Perkins planning process. There was no one looking at contracts. And so really having someone, whether that's statewide or locally in larger states, who is in charge of that is critically important. We also identified that it's critical that soft skill trainings are being made available and moved into all forms of education. It does not matter whether a student is going back to a local high school, continuing to higher education, or looking to enter the workforce. That soft skill development is really critical and should be incorporated in any services. And then one more key thing to point out is that paid trainings and apprenticeships and internships need to be available. As you all know, for this population, upon release, they often have fines and fees, restitution, and that's on top of housing and food needs. And so asking them to forego payment for an 8-9 month period to conduct a training program just isn't feasible. It's not something that's going to be successful. And so really recognizing that there are these financial barriers and meeting the needs through making sure that the services provided are providing funding. Once again, just looking at leveraging available resources, make sure that what's being provided matches local area job growth, that partnerships are being formed with WIOA boards, workforce boards, chambers of commerce to identify what those trainings are and what those services are that are most in demand, and thinking through how that can be utilized and that information can be driven to make those decisions about CTE services. And then around data, recognizing the difficulty of collecting this data, but to really identify some key core component data pieces to track, such as attendance or participation in workforce development programs, CTE credits earned, and then whether employment was obtained and maintained. We believe these are some core data pieces that systems are capable of collecting that can provide a lot of critical information to help guide decision making. Also want to mention that we are, coming off of this brief, looking to see how we can work with states and jurisdictions and service providers to meet the needs and improve practice for this population. So if anything really struck a chord, if there's something within your state or system that you would love to talk more about, please do feel free to reach out to me after this presentation to talk through how we might be able to partner and look how we can take the lessons learned from the survey to improve practice on the ground. I only covered a little bit of what we talked about within the brief, so please do check out the on-track brief. It can be found on our website, or if you can't find it because our website is difficult to navigate, please send me an email. So I'm happy to provide that or answer any other questions that we weren't able to get to today. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jacob. As you all heard, CTE programs and juvenile justice facilities are not of the highest quality, but before we jump into some of the levers that can be used from Perkins 5 to advance equity in CTE and juvenile justice facilities, I want to touch on briefly the state role in advancing equity. So state leaders must identify and dismantle historical barriers and construct systems that support each learner in accessing, feeling welcome in, fully participating in, and successfully completing a high-quality CTE program of study. And in practice, this means acknowledging the history of CTE as well as the current state of CTE. As you all heard Jacob present, the quality of programs in juvenile justice facilities are not the best, so it's important that state leaders acknowledge that. And advancing equity in CTE also means leveraging data to identify and address equity gaps. As you heard Jacob mention, it's really important to track key employment outcomes for incarcerated youth in facilities, as well as other outcomes. It's also important for state leaders to build trust with historically marginalized communities. Because of the history of CTE, not all communities see the value and promise of CTE, and a key component of this is establishing feedback loops to ensure each voice is heard, and Perkins 5 can play a key role in this, and we'll touch on that later. It also means allocating resources appropriately to expand access to high-quality CTE. So for state leaders, this could mean creating the environment and using their role as a convener to build the partnerships that are necessary to help advance high-quality CTE programs in juvenile justice facilities. And it's also important for state leaders to put measures in place to support each learner to achieve success. As you heard Jacob mention, it's really important that there's post-release services for learners from juvenile justice facilities. To this end, state leaders have a responsibility to ensure that CTE programs in juvenile justice facilities are high quality. CTE programs in juvenile justice facilities, like any program, should provide rigorous academic and technical knowledge and skills and align with high skill, high wage, and in-demand career opportunities. So throughout Perkins 5, you'll see mention of out-of-school and at-risk youth, and the definition for out-of-school youth in Perkins 5 comes from the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, also known as WIOA, and this involves individuals who are subject to the juvenile or adult justice system, and the definition for at-risk youth comes from the Every Student Succeeds Act, also known as ESSA, and this involves individuals who have come into contact with the juvenile justice system. And this becomes really important when thinking about the role that Perkins 5 can play in fostering stakeholder engagement. Under Perkins, the eligible recipients are required to consult a number of entities within a state on the state development process, including representatives of agencies serving out-of-school youth, homeless children and youth, and at-risk youth. So this includes individuals who represent agencies that serve juvenile justice-involved youth. And so this provides an opportunity for state leaders to develop their plans in a way that prioritizes the juvenile justice system as these stakeholders help to determine priorities for the state. Also, Perkins 5 introduces the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment. The Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment requires local recipients to review student performance, program quality, and progress towards the implementation of CTE programs of study at least once every 2 years and consult a wide variety of stakeholders during the process as part of the local application that must be submitted to the eligible agency to receive funds. Local recipients are required to consult a number of groups during the needs assessment process and develop the local application. And these groups include representatives of agencies serving out-of-school youth, homeless children and youth, and at-risk youth. So again, local recipients should be consulting with agencies that serve juvenile justice-involved youth, and these stakeholders can again help to determine priorities. And then every 2 years, the local recipient is required to do this again, which helps to identify the needs of these individuals. And the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment should review specific elements, but one of those elements is progress towards the implementation of equal access to high-quality CTE courses and programs of study for all students. So if the local recipient has consulted agencies that serve juvenile justice-involved youth and it's determined that it's a priority to close equity gaps for those specific populations, and this is something that they would have to address through the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment. In addition to stakeholder engagement, funding is a powerful lever in the law to ensure high-quality CTE programs in juvenile justice facilities. States can choose to only fund CTE programs that are high quality and aligned to high-skill, high-wage, and in-demand occupations. Under Perkins 5, there are many funding levers to support access and equity, which you can see on your screen highlighted in blue. However, state leaders can leverage the state leadership funds to advance high-quality CTE programs in juvenile justice facilities specifically. Perkins 5 increases the allowable state set-aside from 1% to 2% to serve individuals in state institutions, and specifically adds juvenile justice facilities to the types of institutions where these funds can be used. State leaders have a responsibility to ensure that these funds are only being invested in high-quality CTE programs, and they can influence the quality of CTE programs in juvenile justice facilities by establishing MOUs to hold institutions accountable and to ensure that the same programmatic expectations that would be applied to CTE programs that are not in juvenile justice facilities are applied to CTE programs in juvenile justice facilities. So now I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Marcy Mack, who is going to talk about what Oklahoma is doing to advance CTE programs in their juvenile justice facilities. Marcy, doesn't seem that we can hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for allowing me to join the conference today and talk a little bit about what we get to do in Oklahoma Career Tech as we look at serving individuals who have been criminally justice involved. In our state, we do have an opportunity. I kind of want to give an overview of our various connection points that we get to work with in the criminally justice involved and how that helps in our juvenile population and has allowed us to be able to grow and serve various individuals in our juvenile population as well. We have been in the business of working with our Department of Corrections since 1971 in providing programs, as you can see on the map, across the state of Oklahoma We do serve individuals in minimum, medium, and maximum facilities behind prison walls, as well as within juvenile facilities that are ran by our Office of Juvenile Affairs, and also through partnerships with our technology centers, which provide for juniors and seniors and adults various high-quality training programs. We have partnerships with them to where some of our individuals who are serving within a juvenile correctional facility have the opportunity to also participate at the local technology center through their time that they are at the Juvenile Skills Center. So in that work and building upon that, some of our areas of instruction that you can see here, we do cover a wide variety of areas. However, when we look at programs that we are going to provide to individuals who have been criminally justice involved and we help them into the workplace, for any of our programs, our instructors for each of these programs are held to the same standard as our programs that are not offered within the correctional facility, and that is they are required to help them with that next step, which is into employment. And they are required to provide the placement data, wage data, certification for the individuals that transition out. And we do have an agreement with our Department of Corrections and also our Office of Juvenile Affairs that allow for us to do follow-up and help with placement of our students up to 6 months to a year after they've been in the program. And as was mentioned previously, there are some other barriers that we know 100% come into play as our students are transitioning out. And so we are very active in helping our students not only find employment and connect with their next step in their career, but also to take care of some of the other barriers that they engage with. For all of the areas of instruction that you see here, built into each of those components, we also require the workplace skills. We connect them with industry throughout this process, just along the exact same criteria as we do for our programs that are offered outside of correctional facilities. Our outcomes and some of our measurements, as I mentioned, enrollment, placement, wage information. In a year, we serve a little over 2,000 individuals through our various partnerships. And one of the key factors as we look at placement, we want to make sure that we are working in the high skill, high demand, high wage area, because individuals do have commitments when they come out, not just their own financial needs, but they potentially have their fines and various things that they need to take care of. So if we are not helping them move into a higher wage job, we are not providing them all the benefit that we can. So that is very important to us and all of our programs as we evaluate additional programs and look at the measurements of each of our programs. So specifically to our delivery models for youth, when we look at, we do have ones that are specifically within our correctional facilities that are designed specifically for youth. Currently, we have 2 male facilities that we are in, and we are working to be allowed into one of the female facilities, so we will be offering specific career tech training within a female juvenile facility. Through this process, the career tech programs are integrated with their academic components, and the career tech educators that are within the facility are a part of the student's team. So each of the individuals that are in the facilities that we get to work in are assigned a team that includes their career navigator, anybody who is helping them with their social components, their academic instructor, the individuals from Office of Juvenile Affairs, as well as our career tech educator. We get to be a part of that core team so that we are holistically helping the individual as they finish their stay at the juvenile facility and then transition back into our communities. The example on the screen of Cedar Canyon It is a residential group home, and we do offer construction technology within that particular area. The instructor that is in that program does provide each of his students. He has 16 is the maximum capacity at that particular facility. And so each of those students, as they go through their area of construction, he has them on their own individual plan of which areas of construction are they looking to go into. We validate where those students are going to be transitioning to as they leave the custody of the Office of Juvenile Affairs, so that we are starting to connect them with employers well before their time of being released. And then we do have the availability for those students to be transported to various locations to meet with employers, and then employers are also allowed to be on the facility to work directly with those students who may be looking to be employed with them in the future. So we do have a couple of models that we get to be within the correctional facilities. Another area for us in the delivery to youth is we have the opportunity for youthful offender programs, which, as Brianna indicated there, where we talk about at-risk, out-of-school youth, ones that this could potentially be, they are not yet assigned to a facility. They do have an opportunity for a last chance, and so it is at a couple of our technology centers. One of them offers welding, and the other one does offer construction trades as well. It is a definite partnership with industry. The students within those programs do specifically focus on the various industries in the area and work that partnership. So as they complete their certifications and they must meet the specific minimum certification requirements to be able to exit the program, then they're ready to go online. They're already familiar with their employer. They're very familiar with their employer's expectations, so that as they're dealing with the other components, the social components and transition pieces, the component with their and opportunity with their employer, they have already been able to work through some of those obstacles that may be there. We, in each of those pieces and moving those forward, we also have community partners that we get to work with as we talk about criminally justice-involved youth. We do have an opportunity, as with Perkins 5, we're very blessed to be able to have that percentage that we can add, because we are working to focus on the homeless population as well. That is not an area that we have had a substantial footprint in. We've had various small sectors that we've helped. Now we do have the opportunity to sit on the statewide advisory for homeless youth, as well as the largest organization in Oklahoma that does help with homeless youth. We have a position on their advisory board to be able to integrate career and technology education into that process. So in the delivery for the students through the training process, each of those criteria, program quality, align with our programs that are offered throughout the state. The other piece that we do provide a more intense and one-on-one conversation about, and it was discussed a little bit earlier in the research, the post-release component for us, that is not just another option. When we view that in our state, it's not just something that we can do if we want to. It is a part of the whole educational approach. That transition, we do leverage our federal dollars. We leverage our state dollars, as well as local resources with our nonprofits and individuals in the communities that we have identified that will assist our students as they transition back into the communities. We do have employment coordinators that work directly with our juvenile population as well as our adult population, so that when our students leave the program, not only do they have their certifications and have the connection with employers and potential opportunities for what that next step may be. They will have a portfolio with a resume. They will have sample interviews that they've already been through, interview skills, job searching strategies that the initial employment that they have, we will help them with that. As they continue their career, we want to make sure that they have those skill sets that they can carry on throughout their career, and those employability skill sets from leadership to communication, showing up on time, expectations of teamwork. Those are pieces that our employment coordinators work with our students before they transition out into our communities. And I talk about some of those other accessible resources. What we use our nonprofit and our community partners for is from housing to transportation to even being able to get their driver's license or identification documents, making sure that they know where to obtain food, clothing, appropriate work clothing, if they have medical or mental health needs or legal needs that they need to address as they transition out. We have an asset map across the state, and then we make sure that we connect our students directly with those resources in the community, and do have the authority to provide follow-up for 6 months to a year, and still meet within state statute of being able to work with our students as they transition out. The ability for us to use our Perkins dollars and the opportunity for the expansion to be utilized in the criminal justice space for us and the post-release for us is an area that we're going to utilize those additional resources so that we can also help our students across the board get into that career and be able to grow within that career, and so that they do not, to be able to find a way to pay for things, they do not choose to reoffend or enter back into the criminal justice system. And so for us, that is our primary target for Perkins 5 and the additional dollars that we are able to garner as a state to utilize for criminally justice involved individuals. In our gap analysis and our needs assessment and talking with our partners on where are some of our potential opportunities for us are to be able to strengthen our post-release conversation and making sure we bring more businesses online. That for us is going to be a critical component as we move forward.
Great. Thank you, Marcy. It was really heartening to hear all of the good work that Oklahoma is doing to ensure that criminally justice involved youth are able to have access to the supports that they need and the services that they need. Jacob and Marcy, we have a question about how do providers of CTE services connect with juvenile justice facilities. So can you talk about how CTE providers can make those connections?
Sure, I will be happy to jump in on that question of how we are able to do that here in the state of Oklahoma. We work directly with the state director over the Office of Juvenile Affairs. He is a member that we serve on various panels with and different advisory groups with. He also does serve as a cabinet member to the governor, and so we get an opportunity to work directly with him. They do supervise all of the juvenile, criminally injustice, juvenile areas across the state. So ours is a direct conversation with them. Depending on the area of need, then we have the opportunity to connect various educational institutions. If it is a program that needs to be within a facility, we can work with the educational institutions in that area, or we also have the opportunity, if it's within a facility, our state agency does run the school system for our skill centers, so we do have the opportunity to create those programs and fund those programs from the state level as well. So depending on the area of the state, depending on the needs for our youth population, we do start specifically with the Office of Juvenile Affairs and then branch out from there, whether it's a contractor or partner that they have, and then we move the educational conversation forward.
Yeah, I wish I could say that there was an easy answer, but it really does vary by state nationally. And we had a state respond to our survey who said that, due to union contracts, they could actually only have union correctional officers providing instruction within facilities, so they actually couldn't bring partners into the facility work. And so it can really vary by state about what that looks like in terms of getting registered and becoming a workforce development provider. And then, certain states it's run by the Department of Education. In certain states, the juvenile system is its own Department of Education. We were actually just in DC with Brianna and the CTE director out of Rhode Island. So, Rhode Island, he may be the person to reach out to. And so I would say is to reach out, to the head of the, juvenile system within your state to see, who they put in charge of that and who's responsible for that. Or, that this is something that CSG can help with, is that if you're looking, we have connections in a lot of states. We've worked with a lot of systems and can help guide about who that might be the right person to ask that is. And that's how we can serve a role as a national organization to help facilitate those conversations.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing, it's really important to find that person of contact who has those connections and can facilitate the connection between the CTE system and the juvenile justice system. We have a question about data, and Jacob, you can probably answer this. How many of the states had juvenile justice data integrated into a state longitudinal data system?
So to answer your question, we didn't get that in depth in terms of the survey, so I can't say this with a high level of certainty, but I would say not many. The only state I can say with 100% certainty did was South Carolina. I believe Oregon does as well, but it's not a consistently tracked thing. It's not built into those systems, and so it's relatively rare. It's hard to get good numbers. I know, Brianna talked a little bit about equity. We would have loved to see equity and be able to look at that, but that wasn't something that was tracked by state, so we couldn't report on it consistently. We were able to look at some level of gender inequity in terms of availability of services that's in the report, but the level of data that's available and how it's put into systems is usually in a separate system. It's not tracked consistently or reported on, and so it's difficult to access.
Yeah, based on my knowledge too, I don't think many states have it integrated into their data systems yet, but hopefully soon. We have another data question that hopefully Marcy and Jacob, you can both answer. What are the barriers to collecting data on workforce development services?
I can start first and then turn it over to you, Marcy, about what your experiences have been. I think there are a couple of barriers. The first is that for many states, it just hasn't been a focus area. Collecting data requires resources, it requires focus, and it's just not something that has been built into systems or been a priority. And when systems already exist, it can be extremely difficult depending on contracts, who's managing data systems, what kind of data staff they have, to just be able to improve and include new data tracking systems. So that's just been I think the first hurdle is that it just wasn't a focus. It wasn't something that was looked at consistently, and going back and putting that back into a system can prove to be a struggle. But the other piece that we hear consistently is that it's incredibly difficult to get consistent data once youth are out from under supervision. So, if you're trying to look at a longer term, outcome in terms of maintaining employment or getting a certification that requires, more than the 6 months that they may be under supervision, it's difficult data to get. It's just relying on surveys and people filling it out who have no obligation to do so. We've seen some success in terms of partnerships. If you have that partnership with your education departments and your workforce boards, that's data that they're tracking and can do some level of matching to see that sort of long-term outcomes. There is surveys, you utilize incentives to help get people to fill those out. But we do recognize that once someone is out of the juvenile system, it can be difficult to get consistent data on outcomes, and that's something that exists across sort of the all positive youth outcome tracking.
And to follow along 100% with the specific outlines that you listed there with difficulty, we do have those same specific, some of our areas that we find difficulty in the data is if we do want to do the follow-up, making sure that we can share that data across various platforms that we may have in the state, and if it is different entities that potentially have that, are there statutory requirements that either restrict or disallow us from being able to share that data when we look at our workforce system? And so for us, those are some of the challenges that we have ran into. We do get to do the follow-up for the 6 months to a year, but after that, if we want to do a comparison with an employment database or something along that line, for us, we have to look at that a little bit differently because of statutes that may and laws that may currently be in place that do not allow for us to share that data back and forth with some of our other workforce partners. So those are things that we are looking at right now, and we are working to remove those barriers, hopefully in the next legislative cycle.
So what I'm hearing is that there's not consistent data and that statutory requirements can also prevent states from being able to collect workforce development services data. So we have a question, Marcy, and this is probably going to be directed to you. With a cap of 2% of Perkins allocated for state facilities, how are you leveraging such a small amount to have a large impact for so many programs?
Thank you for that question. For us, it is a small amount for us. However, even bringing a small amount to the table with our other partners, that is how we're able to bring in other community partners, other state agency partners that may be able to help and support and provide the services. If we are providing the educational and technical training component, which is the core of our existence, in some of those other pieces of the employability skills, some of the work-based learning experiences, it allows for us to bring in some more of those partners so that they can see we may invest, our dollar amount may not look like a lot of what we can invest, but it does give us more leverage points and levers to be able to bring in some of the other partners who can build our foundation for our students as they transition as well.
Yeah, I really think it's important, the idea of just bringing even a little bit to the table can have such a large impact. So as we wrap this up, this is a question for both Marcy and Jacob. For states that are just beginning this work and are trying to transform their CTE programs and juvenile justice facilities into high-quality CTE programs, what's the advice that you would give them, the top 3 things that they should consider or take action to improve programs in juvenile justice facilities?
I can just keep the trend of going first here for simplicity's sake. I would say, 3 key focus areas will be to make sure that what you're providing is matched to providing long-term employment. So, whether that's looking at local labor market trends, talking to workforce boards, but, we see and hear a lot about, facilities that will provide a certification for completing, but it's not recognized by employers. So really making sure that what your services are is building towards an actual credential or identified skills and on a path that will lead to that gainful employment. I think the second piece would be to make sure that everything is integrated with a soft skill development. So really make sure that resume building, teamwork, conflict resolution, looking at how to apply for financial aid and understanding what the expungement process and case closure, all of these things that aren't necessarily workplace skills, is really integrated and built into any service that you're providing. You shouldn't be providing a CTE service that doesn't include some form of soft skill development. And the third is to collect the data, to make the effort and to report on it consistently to see if it's working. You don't know a program is working until you're looking at it. It might be, it might not be, but it's really critical and crucial to make sure that you are consistently looking at whether the programming that you're providing is leading to the outcomes that you're looking for, and then if not, working to identify what that barrier is. It may be the program, it may be policies in your state, but it's about identifying what it is. But if you can't answer that question of whether it's working, you can't identify why not.
And the top three areas that come to mind do align right along with what Jacob had mentioned. For me, when Brianna asked that, employment, wage potential, and transferable skill sets certification when looking at a program and how to get started, making sure that there is employment available in the area. And when I say employment, are there companies within that sector that are open to the possibility of employing an individual who has been criminally justice involved? That is a key factor in making sure of the programs that we put in. And then when they are hired by those employers, is it going to be a wage that's going to help them be at a level that they can actually work to get ahead financially, or is it at a wage that they'll be lucky to be able to maintain day to day, and it will be a constant struggle for them? And then making sure that the skill sets, if it is in the construction industry, what particular transferable skill sets, if they have certification that they go in, is it NCCR certification? Are they getting their OSHA? Are they getting their forklift? All of those basic things. So if they choose to go into various sectors of the construction industry, do they have the transferable skill sets to have foundational ability to move into those various areas, and then also to continue on with career advancement?
Thank you. I think that's really great advice for states, the importance of looking at labor market data to make sure that the programs are aligned and ensuring that students have access to opportunities to help them develop soft skills. I think it's very important. Unfortunately, we do not have enough time for another question, but if you do have any questions, Jacob and Marcy, as well as myself's email is posted there for you all. And I just want to thank Jacob and Marcy for taking the time to talk about this very important issue. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. Thank you.